Now it happened that while the multitude was pressing around him and listening to the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw two boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. So he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little way from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." Simon answered and said, "Master, we worked hard all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, I will do as you say and let down the nets." When they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat for them to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so that they had begun to sink. But when Simon Peter saw this, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, "Depart from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish which they had taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not fear, for from now on you will be catching men." When they brought their boats to the land, they left everything and followed Jesus. My sisters and brothers, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So, my name is Bishop Francis. For those of you who don't know me, it's great to be here. Well, I think I know, well, I certainly know many of you, and I just want you to know it's a joy to be here at St. Matthew. I've been here enough times now over the years that I have no idea how many times I've been here. Just know it feels good to be with you again, so thanks for receiving me. So I'd like to jump right into breaking open the word for today. The word is meant to, today especially, is meant to help us with our spiritual lives, meant to help us grow in our relationship with God. So that's my intention in the next few minutes, to try to help with that by exploring these readings. One thing that jumps out at me when I look at these three readings together is that in every case, we have a person who has an experience of God, and in the middle of that experience of God, they feel a deep sense of being unworthy and kind of like a separation from God, and a deep sense of their sinfulness. Now, I want to explain what I think this means for us in a way that I hope is a corrective to how many people have told me they grew up in the church and have a kind of a, what I think of as sort of a warped view of what that might mean. Let me make it really clear from the outset. in my understanding of the spiritual life, God has no desire to make us feel bad about ourselves. God has no desire to reduce our self-image to the point of where we just feel awful. We feel like a worm. We're overcome with how sinful we are and all that. That is not what's being talked about here today. Isaiah has an experience of God, sort of a mystical experience, apparently while he was in worship at the temple. And in the middle of that, he just realizes that God is so present and so real that he realizes the difference, sort of the gap between where he is and where God is. It doesn't mean that God wanted to sort of make him feel like a worm. That's not it at all. Imagine if you're someone who plays the piano, and you play the piano, okay, you're able to entertain people and whatever. And so you're in a living room setting where there's this huge grand piano, and you're ready to play it, but somebody else walks in who's a concert pianist. And they sit down and they start playing, and you're just like, oh my God. And you can't even imagine following them. They're just so awesome. But on the other hand, it hits you that maybe this person would be able to lead you to the point where you're able to play much better because they are so awesome in the way they play. That's more what it's like, what's going on with Isaiah. It's a call. It's God pulling us out of ourselves into something even greater, even something more. And that's exactly what was happening in the second reading. The second reading at least alludes to Paul's conversion, where he was out persecuting the church. And then he had this very deep experience of God. Catholics think he fell off a horse. Protestants say he was walking and fell to the ground, so go figure. But he was on his way to Damascus. And in the middle of this experience that he had of God, he was, it was like he just saw the gap. The way he was living was not at the high level that it could have been. And he was called to live a higher life. It's the same way with Peter in the gospel. Peter says, get away from me, I'm a sinner. I can't stand being around you. Again, not instructing us that somehow Christianity is about feeling bad about ourselves at all. It isn't that at all. It's an invitation to a higher form of life. So that when he was in the presence of Jesus, he realized he was in the presence of something so much more. And it opened up the possibilities of him living at a much higher level. In 2004, the ECC had just been born the year before. And we had our first retreat. For a few years, we had retreats on off years from the Synod. And it was out in Estes Park, Colorado, and I had just heard about the ECC. And I went with one of my great friends in life, George von Stamwitz, who is now the chancellor of the ECC. And we were going to go check this thing out, see what it was like. Now, I had lived a life where I was a Roman Catholic priest for 18 years. I was involved in a very dynamic inner city parish where we had a direct service to the poor that was incredibly moving. What's the word I want? The place where I felt most like we were living the gospel was this thing we called winter patrol, where we would go out on winter nights and look for homeless people who were unable to find places warm to stay, and we would bring them to a shelter. We'd see clumps of carpet in the alleys of St. Louis, and we'd kick them because we knew that was often, not hard, but I mean kind of move them because we knew that was a place where homeless people would often sleep. We'd look in dumpsters, and indeed we would find homeless people all the time, and we would take them to shelter. One night there was a man and wife who brought their little baby to the shelter. And we weren't used to handling anything other than men in our shelter. There was a different shelter for women, but we needed to take these people in and find a place for the baby. And we had an old parish picnic soda trough. It looked like a trough. It was like, you've seen these things at picnics where you put cold water in to store soda and stuff like that. And so we put blankets in there and put the baby in there, and it was Christmas Eve. And we were just about to go upstairs and celebrate midnight mass. It's awesome. So living like this was always made me feel very close to the gospel, but I had some personal things I needed to work out for myself. And I eventually decided, as much as I love being a priest, I need to get away. And so I left the priesthood. I worked in the corporate world for 14 years before I started feeling the call to come back. And I started exploring different paths to get back into the ministry, and that's when I heard about the ECC. And so I went with George to this retreat out in Estes Park. And we were sitting in chairs like you're sitting right now, and somebody from one of the parishes was standing up and talking about their ministry. Now realize this is like 14 years since I had done anything like what they're about to talk about. So they were saying, you know, just want you to know kind of what we do at our church. So a couple of us were out in the alley one night and wondering what our ministry would be. And we're just walking the streets, hoping God would speak to us. And we saw this homeless woman, and we were just wondering, you know, what we were going to say to her to encounter. Instead, she spoke first, and she said, "Feed my people." And they like turned to each other to ask what that was all about, and they turned back and she was gone. And they decided to set up a restaurant that they would pay for. It would be free for people who needed meals. And they would feed people. And that's how they started their ministry. And this person who was explaining this just went on one ministry like this after another, to the point where I was just crying like a baby. And I turned around and looked at George, this sophisticated world-class lawyer who jets all over the world making these million-dollar deals and billion-dollar deals, and he's crying like a baby. And we just looked at each other like, this is so real. We want to join a church that's this real. And I felt a certain conviction. I don't know what else to call it. Because I didn't feel bad about myself. I didn't feel like I shouldn't have left the priesthood. I thought God was in all that too. But so it's hard to describe. It's just that at that moment, I felt like the person who saw someone else who could play the piano much better. And I'm like, I want to play the piano again. I want to get back to that. It was like a call to something that was just so much more than what I was doing in that moment. And that's what it's like. That's what the experience of grace is like. God is not trying to shame us. God is trying to call us to a place where we're more generous, more putting aside our own desire to be big and important and rich and all the other things, and just be a lover. Just be someone who gives. Someone who finds life in interacting with other people where it's about sharing what you have with someone else. It's pretty simple. And that, I believe, is what these passages are about today. When we need to remember that for the Hebrews, the word sin means missing the mark. It's like sometimes we get off the path, and we need, somebody needs to say, like a master archer, and say, you keep hitting the arrow out here, and I need you to get more like a bullseye. So keep trying that till we get you not missing the mark anymore. That's more like God is like a coach trying to say, you're actually going to be a lot happier and living more if you will go this way and start hitting the mark more. Sometimes that's what these encounters with God is like. Never about sending us away shamed. Never. It is not what all this talk about sin is about. It's more like sin is separation from God. And sometimes we get a glimpse of how we're not that magnificent pianist that we would like to be. And God is not shaming us, but God is like this magnificent therapist who allows us to see, but in a loving way where we feel invited to change and be more, and it's okay, and we don't feel like we're bad, we feel like we're moving in the direction of goodness, and we're glad about it. I've been reading the life of St. Ignatius recently, and this is exactly what happened to him. And he was sort of a psychologist in his own way back in the 16th century, and he seemed to really understand internal workings. And he said he learned to discern that I would move forward in a new direction when God allowed me to feel good about this new direction. When I could see that it actually is consoling to kiss a leper's sore. Where I'm actually attracted to that. That's God's grace moving inside of me like a great therapist who's helping us to move toward a healthier form of life. There are many, many saints like that. We had a marvelous education program some of you attended in between Masses today, where we talked about Clare and Francis. One of the things about our awesome Catholic identity is all these saints who, if we pay attention to them, all had these great moments where they were converted and moved closer to God. But none of this is meant to say that we should be proud about being Catholic because we know all these saints. Let's be proud about being Catholic because we know that we too are called to be inspired to be more, just like all these saints. This call today is happening for you. So, you're Isaiah, you're Paul, you are Claire, you are Peter, you are Mary Magdalene. You're the one being called today to only reject sin in the sense that you're leaving aside a lesser form of life and moving to a place where you're much more deeply rooted in God. Can I get an amen?
Amen.